My goal this morning is to inspire you that your Christian faith is the indispensable ingredient needed to turn back the tide of despair that exists in our nation today. At a time when the institutions that drive human happiness seem to be crumbling, our collective Christian faith can make our lives a time to build and strengthen those institutions. The institution of family is weakening as marriage is on the decline in certain communities, and more children are born outside of marriage. The institution of education is in danger as the country's most vulnerable children do not have access to high-quality schools. And of course, believe in religious institutions themselves are at nearly all-time lows. But the good news is that the solutions to these challenges are within our grasp. I've titled my remarks, Leveraging Our Christian Influence to Promote Agency as a Pathway to Human Flourishing. Through our Christian influence, we can create an empowering alternative to the victimhood narrative that seems to be so dominant today. But I want to discuss this influence not in the abstract, not just for the need to proselytize, but in the particular way Christian influence and our belief in God must be operationalized for the common good. As the president mentioned, I am a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where I research the forces that drive upward mobility and how people achieve the American dream. I study factors like family formation, religion, adoption, and education. But my work is not just theory. I put my ideas in action, on the ground, putting these ideas into practice where it really matters, in the very communities that we are seeking to uplift. Since 2010, I have been CEO of public charter schools in New York City, the first 10 years running a network of all boys and all girls elementary and middle schools in the heart of the South Bronx, 149th Street and 3rd Avenue, and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Our faculty educated more than 2,000 students across 6 campuses, primarily low-income Black and Hispanic students, with each year having an excruciatingly long wait list of nearly 5,000 families. While our public charter schools sent nearly 100% of our middle school graduates to top high schools and to college, the reality for other kids was that in places like District 12 in the Bronx, only 7% of traditional district public school students who started 9th grade 4 years later graduated from high school ready for college. Think about that. About 2,000 students started 9th grade in the year 2015. 4 years later, 93% had either dropped out or they had earned their high school diploma, but still could not do math nor reading without remediation if they were to go to college. That is an injustice that we have to resolve. So in 2020, after 10 years of running elementary and middle schools, I endeavored to open a new network of public charter high schools. And in fact, in that same district, where only 7% of kids are graduating ready for college. Why not bring a world-class education into the community that needs it the most? We devised a clever way to open using the underutilized capacity in existing charters, because otherwise there was a ban to open new schools, to give you a sense of the challenges that you're going to have to face if you want to assert your Christian influence. For this good deed to open a great school, the UFT Teachers Union was so threatened by the growth of new charter schools that they filed a lawsuit to shut us down before we even opened. But sometimes David beats Goliath. We prevailed over the Teachers Union. 1 week before school was scheduled to open, a New York State Supreme Court judge threw out the union's case, setting a major precedent for how we can open great public charter high schools, not only in New York, but across the country. Change can happen. So I'm proud to say that I bring greetings from Vertex Partnership Academies, the virtues-based international baccalaureate public charter high school that we founded and opened in the Bronx in 2022. And I'll provide some more detail later in my remarks. Now, the reason I run schools is that I had to put my faith in action. In the article by John Stott that hopefully all the President's Fellows read or have read by now, given my encouragement, he says that, quote, "A power of Christians is the power of example. Truth is powerful when it's argued. It's even more powerful when it is exhibited. People need not only to understand the argument, they need to see the benefits of the argument with their own eyes. I run schools because I want our students in the Bronx to know that they can do hard things. I want our community to see with their own eyes what is possible. Even in the face of inevitable challenges, they can lead virtuous, self-determined lives with agency and integrity, with meaning and purpose. Unfortunately, we gather today amidst a growing pessimism, increasing evidence that Americans nationwide see the promise of our nation slipping out of reach. Just recently, the Wall Street Journal released the results of a survey showing only 36% of Americans believe that the American dream still holds true, substantially fewer than the 53% who said so in 2012 and 48% in 2016. At a time when belief in the American dream seems to be in rapid freefall, the moral imperative for our gathering is even more urgent. We must offer the optimistic view and truth that the American dream is real and it persists, while also acknowledging that it is unfairly and unevenly distributed. Thus, our charge is to demystify how upward mobility across generations is being realized and the role that Christian influence plays for those segments of America that are flourishing. And I apologize in advance, you can't invite a scholar from American Enterprise Institute and not expect data to be an integral part of the presentation, so that's coming. But in Stott's article, and I think you, again, should all read it, he rejects this idea of pessimism, but also warns against what he calls blind optimism. Christians are sober-minded, biblical realists. If we are to solve problems, we must match our Christian faith with our deep analytical capability. So with that mind, towards that end, in 2014, Harvard economist Raj Chetty and his team of researchers conducted a study entitled, "Where is the Land of Opportunity?" They researched the income records for more than 40 million children and their parents. Their core sample consisted of all children in the United States born between 1980 and 1982, whose income was then measured in 2011 and 2012, when they were approximately 30 years old. Chetty and his team then dissected the local factors and institutions driving intergenerational mobility by identifying those cities and states where children from families in the lowest 20% of income levels were most likely to have incomes in the top 20% as adults 30 years later. And here are the results. This map, you all can look at your images up there. This map is called the Geography of Upward Mobility in the United States. It vividly illustrates the uneven distribution of access to the American dream. The lighter the color, the greater the likelihood of upward mobility. So out of 741 commuting zones, that's how they broke up the country, Salt Lake City, along with San Jose, California, were ranked as having the highest rate of absolute mobility in our nation. Other cities, such as Atlanta and Milwaukee, rated the lowest. We're here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Out of the 50 largest commuting zones, Grand Rapids actually ranked 29th in terms of intergenerational mobility. So as Christians, we should ask the question, what would it take to improve those conditions? What would it take to make more of the country have a much lighter scale than those, particularly those images in red? How does our Christian faith help us to think about this? The great Tim Keller once said that the Christian faith gives us a new conception of work as the means by which God loves and cares for his world through us. There are important implications of this idea. First, it means all work, even the most menial tasks, has great dignity. In our work, we are God's hands and fingers, sustaining and caring for his world. Secondly, it means one of the main ways to please God in our work is to simply to do work well. Some have called this the ministry of competence. I call it the ministry of brutal honesty, in which we as faith influencers exhibit two qualities. One, empathy for people living in challenging conditions. And two, the ability to critically assess data and trends to understand why those challenging conditions exist in the first place. Our work then is to combine that empathy and analytical ability in our faith to create solutions that respect existing conditions while also addressing the underlying factors like the impact of structural barriers as well as individual choices. What is immediately evident from this chart is that intergenerational mobility varies substantially across areas within the United States. What is also interesting is that we are all governed by the same federal system and national policies, but given the variation in the chart, clearly what matters most in terms of upward mobility is what's happening locally, right? So the study describes the United States as a collection of societies, some of which are lands of opportunity with high rates of mobility across generations, and others that experience persistent inequality, places in which few children escape poverty. Why? Why? What is it that ties these lands of opportunities together? Because if we can understand the most prominent properties in those particular areas, then we can be in a better position to replicate in other communities. Given that, I would like to hone in on the three characteristics the study most correlated with the lands of opportunity. What did they find? What was common in those areas? First, quote, the strongest predictors of upward mobility are measures of family structure, such as the fraction of single parents in the area, end quote. Marriage and family matters. Second, quote, high upward mobility areas tend to have higher fractions of religious individuals and greater participation in local civic organizations, end quote. Faith matters, especially when religious individuals are engaged in direct action, who are asserting their Christian influence. Third, quote, proxies for the quality of the K-12 school system are also correlated with mobility. Areas with higher test scores, lower dropout rates, smaller class sizes have higher rates of upward mobility. Education matters. It's no coincidence that these high rates of family stability, concentrations of religious individuals, and access to quality education are strongly correlated to upward mobility at the neighborhood level. So why aren't we all spending our time exclusively on trying to build those three factors? because I've seen this in my own life. For over 30 years, whether it's at MTV or the White House or Teach for America or running schools for the last 15 years in the Bronx, I've worked with kids from every imaginable background. I've worked with rich kids, poor kids, Black kids, white kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids, intact families, completely unstable families, foster care, homeless kids. I have seen kids growing up in extremely challenging situations: domestic violence, poverty, single parenthood. And as these young people made decisions to enter young adulthood, they unfortunately succumbed to the conditions that were around them, unfortunately recreating the same dysfunction that they experienced as young people and then passed that on to their own children. But I've also seen kids under those same exact conditions make different sets of decisions that put them on a different trajectory to break the cycle of disadvantage. The question is, what makes the difference? What makes the difference? That has been the animating question of my life. What makes the difference between two different young people in similar circumstances, and yet they are able to emerge with a different sense of their own possibility, with a different future orientation? My calling from God is to answer that question and to ensure all young people, regardless of circumstance, know what can make the difference in their lives. My observation is that students that have been able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically had a sense of personal agency, a belief that they could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose. But the sense of agency didn't come from nowhere. They didn't just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment. The force of your free will guided by moral discernment. So think of agency like a vector or velocity, where velocity is not just speed, it's speed and direction. So how is it that young people learn to wield their free will? In which direction? And in my observations over 30 years, young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage usually interacted with what I consider are the four key pillars of human flourishing, what I call free: family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. Let's start with the most important: family. These young people that were able to break the cycle of disadvantage recognized early that regardless of the challenges or dysfunction about the family that they were from, what mattered most is the family that they were on the pathway to form. This is why we have a class called Pathways to Power, in which we teach something called the success sequence in our schools. This is data that shows that if a young person completes just a high school degree, then gets a full-time job, so they learn the dignity and discipline of work, and then if they have children, if they got married first, 97% of millennials who pursue that order of decision-making, education, work, marriage, and children, 97% avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. We teach this class in what I call a descriptive fashion, not prescriptive, meaning that we don't tell you this is what you must do, but that you are the architect of your own life, that there will be decisions that you have, and there are certain pathways that have much greater probability of success relative to others. We want our students to know that the most consequential decision a human being can make is to bring another human being into the world, and that there are better strategies of decision-making that will improve your life as well as those of your future children. The second pillar of free is religion. The young people I have observed who were able to break the cycle of disadvantage typically had a personal faith commitment. They lived by a moral code. They had a sense of right versus wrong, usually informed by an organized religion, usually Christianity, but it almost could be any other organized religion. The key was that they were a part of a community of people that loved them and expected them to live up to that moral code. These young people experienced much lower levels of loneliness, alienation, depression, isolation, so many of the things we hear that young people are confronting in terms of mental health issues. The third pillar of free education. Young people able to break the cycle of disadvantage usually benefited from some type of education freedom or school choice. And the data here is overwhelming. Stanford just produced a study where they analyzed the results of nearly 2 million public school students across nearly 30 states and found that students in public charter schools advance more than their peers in traditional public schools by large margins in both math and reading. So we need to ensure more students have opportunity to go to great schools. And thankfully, more and more states are implementing different versions of school choice. The final and fourth pillar in free is entrepreneurship. If the first three are there, if you're on the pathway to form a strong family, if you have a personal faith commitment through religion, and you've benefited from educational freedom in K to 12, then you're more likely to have what I call an entrepreneurial mindset. It could mean starting a business, but more so, it means that you are a problem solver in your own life, that you have an overcomer's mindset when inevitable challenges come your way. Free is my empowering alternative to inspire a rising generation to maximize their potential, to promote empowering messages of hope and agency versus grievance and dependency. But it's not just theory. Let me describe how we put these ideas of maximizing the potential of each individual into practice. At Vertex Partnership Academies, our students learn a core and lasting body of knowledge, which includes the basic principles of constitutional government, mathematics, science, and language skills, important events in world and US history, and the classical, acknowledged masterpieces of art, music, poetry, and literature, all necessary to lead a responsible life of freedom and American citizenship. But in addition to academic rigor, there is a very deliberate approach to moral formation. Vertex is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, both as an expectation for each student and faculty member in our community to personally adopt, and as a conceptual framework that shapes every aspect of school culture, policies, canon, and curriculum. Courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom are called cardinal virtues from the Latin root cardo, which means hinge, because they are the root virtues upon which all other standards of moral excellence depends. Each cardinal virtue is an intrinsic life habit that we are seeking to cultivate within each of our students. When normed and practiced regularly, these individual behaviors then form the collective basis of a good society, a community that is self-governed by public virtue. And I want some audience participation for this. For each cardinal virtue, we require students to memorize what we call our I statements as part of their process to internalize their sense of personal agency. And I'd like you to read these statements with me, because I want you to imagine our students in the Bronx, our students, primarily Black and Hispanic kids, many from low-income backgrounds, they're getting lots of messages of all the things that they cannot do in their lives, that all these forces based on their race, their gender, their class, all the things that they don't have access to. Think about that as you are saying these words with me, because these are the words that every single student in our school knows. Courage, with me. I reject victimhood and boldly persevere, even in times of uncertainty and struggle. Justice, I uphold our common humanity and honor the inherent dignity of each individual. The inherent dignity of each individual. You don't have dignity because you're black or you're trans or you're this or you're that. You have inherent dignity because you are human. You are part of this common human family. Our students need to know that because everyone else is telling them their most superficial characteristic are these external identifiers, which are meaningless in terms of who you are as a whole person. Temperance, I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and behavior. Wisdom, I make sound judgments based on knowledge of objective, universal truth. Notice, that doesn't say truths. There's not my truth, your truth, our truth. There is the truth. And we as Christians have to stand strong in speaking the truth. So the idea is at first our students grasp the virtues here in their head, but ultimately we want them to grasp it here in their heart. Faithfully, we must communicate to young people, especially those that are struggling, that their life can be their own, that there are pathways to prosperity and power even in the face of life's inevitable obstacles. Through our Christian faith, we can be this powerful messenger. My sincere advice to you, model the behavior you seek in others. Make long-term commitments to your spouse and your family, to your work, to your faith, to your country. And to those, make a commitment to those who have not yet had a chance to experience success, but who can benefit from your wisdom and service. Let me close by sharing a quote from chapter 13 of de Tocqueville's America. And he said, quote, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults," end quote. I've always found that statement compelling because it resonates with the notion that America is always in pursuit of becoming a more perfect union. While the founders laid out inspiring ideals, we are in a constant effort to fully live up to them. In the same way that the tools of self-betterment and self-renewal exist in our country, they also exist within each one of us. We are a redemptive humanity. Indeed, the biblical vision of human flourishing is redemptive. God's mission is to advance his kingdom and ultimately redeem the entire created order through the saving work of Jesus Christ. He calls all Christians to participate in his mission by using their gifts, their talents, and opportunities to draw the spiritually lost to the kingdom through gospel proclamation, to serve other people through acts of mercy and justice, and to glorify him through everyday faithfulness in every sphere of life. I pray that you answer his call. Thank you.